Hey guys, I'm Joel with North Country Vans and welcome back to another build video. So today we got our Formica in that we're going to use for the rear bed platform, and we got most of the panels rough cut for what we want to cover. We used a jigsaw and a circular saw to make the cuts, and we're going to glue it down and then use a flush trim bit in order to get that Formica to line up perfectly with that wood. But before we do, I got to cut an access cubby into one of the panels, and I wanted to show you a quick trick that I use so that they come out looking pretty nice. So you can see this one here where we already cut it out. If you look, we have pretty nice straight edges on here. All of these radiuses line up well with one another. And the way I do that, and I'll take over the one that I'm doing right now. So on this board here, we trace out our outline of that opening that we want. And then we rough cut it with a jigsaw, and we leave varying between a 1/16 and an 1/8 of material still left on there. And then what we do is we take a template, and all this is a piece of 1/4-inch plywood that I used a hole saw and then drilled a hole right in the middle of it and then ran it on my table saw. So I got that nice bend right there. And all I have to do is clamp it on that piece of wood, and then my router bit, remember the flush trim bit with the bearing on it, will follow that and make it nice and perfect. So first what I do is I go through and I make all of these bends first, and then I'll show you the next step on how I get this line nice and straight to follow into those bends. So let me get the rest of these 3 cut out and I'll show you the next step. All right, so we got all 4 corners routed in, and next we're going to use a clamp-on saw guide. And so this is a pretty handy tool. It's 50 inches long, so it'll rip a piece of plywood horizontally, and your circular saw or your jigsaw can follow it, but I like to use my router on it. So all you gotta do is set it on there, get that line to line up right there, and then we'll run the router through, and that's what gives us that nice perfect opening. All right, so we got our first couple of pieces laminated, and we are using Formica brand. This color is called Graphite. Anyways, we got it adhered to the plywood using contact cement and then pressed it all out with a roller. And then we used a flush trim bit in the router again, and we were able to trim that Formica right up to the edge of that plywood. So this opening and the edges here are nice, flush, clean cuts. Just one thing to note for you, if you do this, make sure you go back through and you use a file or some sandpaper on a block, and you just knock that 90-degree edge down. It's sharp enough that if you really tried, you could probably cut yourself on it. So a good idea to do. Like I said before, we are trying to go a little away from the wood look, so I wanted to use a dark color, but I'm also thinking I want to contrast it. So this, you can kind of get the idea of where I'm going for. I want this dark color to make that birch lightness really pop. So at least that's the idea. One thing to note though, that this Formica graphite color, it looks like it matches that front cab area pretty good, and it comes close, but there's just an ever so slight brown tint to it. So I'm not too terribly concerned. I'm thinking if we do hardwood for our bed top, our bench top, and some of the accent pieces like drawer handles, things like that, we can tie it all together, especially some brown flooring, but it's not 100% match up front, just to give you an idea. But anyways, we're gonna laminate the next couple pieces of plywood. So this is a nasty process. So we're gonna get our PPE on, and I'll show you how to do it. All right, so we have the next panel that we're gonna glue up. We have our Formica ready to go, and I've brushed it all off, use an air compressor to blow off any little pieces of sawdust or chips that might be on it. Around the edge of all of this, I've taken a little bit of sandpaper and just knocked the edge down, so that way I don't have any wood fibers kind of folding over, getting in the way of the laminate. And then what we're going to use is we're going to use weldwood. And this is some really nasty stuff. You put it on, you're gonna wait 20 minutes for it to dry, get a good even coat on both the plywood and the back side of that laminate. And then once it's set up, then you put the laminate on top, and we'll space it out with a couple little spacers. That contact cement, once it dries, it's not that sticky. It's only really going to stick when it comes into contact with other contact cement that's dried. It's kind of odd stuff. That allows us to put little wood spacers between there so we can get that panel lined up nice, pull those wood spacers on, drop it down, use a roller, and squeegee out any air pockets that might be in there. And then shortly after that, we can router it and start trimming it off. So I'm going to use a respirator. Like I said, this stuff is nasty. There's all sorts of cautions on the can of it. Don't use near open flames, put your cigarettes out, etc. So just be careful if you're doing it. We're going to apply it with a little chip brush, and we'll go from there.
I feel like Darth Vader in this thing. And just make sure you get a good even coat on that Formica. That contact cement is pretty good and set up. You can see by the reflection on that surface, there's a little bit of tack to it, but it's mostly dry. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a couple little sticks and we just place them down on the surface there, and that'll space off our Formica. So then we can drop it down and get everything lined up. All right, time for the fun part. Now, this stuff is pretty flimsy, so you got to be careful to support it so you don't break it. Then get it lined up. Make sure you have good overhang on the edges, because that way we can route it off and we'll get nice and flush to that plywood. Everything's covered up. All right. I think that looks good. Next, we grab a roller and then we pull the center stakes out, work from the center out, and then we'll roll that sheet until we get all the air bubbles out. And you want to get like 25 pounds per square inch of pressure down there, so that way you make sure you get a good adhesion between both of those surfaces. It's good and tacked down on there now. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our router, again with the flush trim bit, the bearing, that will follow that plywood and cut that Formica nice and perfectly flush to the outside. I'm getting ready to wrap this video up, but the last step that I'm going to do today is I'm going to route in a notch all the way down here on this side of the board and then on the far side over there. And that's going to be able to let me see like a sight glass into that tank so I can tell how much water I have in my fresh water tank. And what I'll probably end up doing is take a small light and put it behind the water tank, and that way it'll illuminate it so I can see the water level in there. And because it'll be underneath the bed, it'll give off just a little bit of light. It might be kind of nice as a night light. So, but if I'm going to screw up any cut today, this one's going to be it. I'm using a plunger router. And what a plunger router does is as you push down on it, the shoe collapses in and allows the router bit to protrude. So I'm going to follow my guide, plunge that router bit, and try to get down there and keep it as precise as I can, but it might be kind of tough, so.
Well, that was not really successful. So I caught the piece of masking tape I was using at the bottom. You can see where that cut is nice and straight, and then all of a sudden it goes whoosh. So that kind of sucks, but I have a plan. So I'm using, I built this, and all it is 1/4-inch birch. It's a template. Drilled 2 hole saw holes on either end, and then used the router table to give me that nice straight edge. And my thought is I can clamp it down there, use a pattern bit, and get a nice cut into it. And it'll leave it a little bit wider so you can see into it easier, because you can be kind of looking at it through an angle. So, well, I'm gonna say that our sight glass has turned out successfully. So we got a couple of our panels that are all set, ready to get put together. It's getting kind of laid out now. I think I'm going to call it a night, and then tomorrow we're going to get started bright and early, and we're going to start putting these panels together. So I'm going to stop this video now, and then tomorrow I'll do another one about how to use a Craig screw tool and also a biscuit joiner, and I'll show you how I assemble these panels, and we'll go from there. But we got a ton of work to do. So we got about a big 4-day rush to get these panels assembled, get this kind of upper bed area to a usable form, tie in some very basic electric, the diesel heater, the vent fan, and maybe a light or two. We'll see how it goes. Because next week, Shannon and I are taking this bad boy and we're heading out to Colorado. And then down to New Mexico. We are going to go visit my best friend who lives down there. Go do some hiking, some exploring, maybe find some good things to eat. And instead of taking the old Airstream, we're going to take this one. It has better brakes, and I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable going down those mountain passes in this thing than that old Airstream. So, but we'll take it as it comes. All right, good night.